Hello there and welcome to 1080's monthly career insight session. So today we're going to be talking about mental health check-ins for board members and senior leaders. So I'm joined today by Liz Osland and Russ Hartland-Shaw. So welcome.
Thank you.
And let's go straight over for some introductions. So Russ, do you want to do a quick introduction?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Russ Hartland-Shaw and I'm an exec and career coach for 1080. So I have a background in sales and business development and learning and development, and then went into coaching about 5 years ago.
Lovely,
Very
thank
happy
you.
to be here.
Brilliant, thank you. And Liz?
Yeah, I'm a trainer, coach and facilitator with 1080 as well, and working with a lot of senior leaders around, executive coaching, career coaching, change in direction, but also increasingly a lot of wellbeing coaching. So yeah, thank you for having me as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm Sarah Burgess. My main role at 1080 is running LinkedIn coaching sessions for all levels of clients, really, from entry level up to board level. So that's my main role. So as always, please do feel free to comment to let us know that you're here and ask any questions that you've got, any comments that you'd like to add. If you're watching on replay later, then please do the same and we will go back later and answer those questions online. So the idea for this session actually came about through Liz, and I think it was Liz Auntie, she just mentioned earlier. So there were a number of articles on LinkedIn about the importance of mental health check-ins for C-suite members. And Deloitte have just released the second survey of their wellbeing at work results. So it's very timely. Okay, so a couple of things that came out of that survey. So it's been confirmed that workforce wellbeing will remain firmly on the agenda of the C-suite. And quite shocking stats that they're showing 60% of employees, 64% of managers and 75% of the C-suite are seriously considering quitting their job for one that will be better supporting of their well-being. So that's kind of the background for this session. So we go straight to the first question, which is why the focus on mental health check-ins for this level of leader? So over to you, Russ.
Yeah, so I think I'm delighted to be talking about this. It's something I'm really passionate about. And I think that the danger with this subject is it gets over-discussed and no one really talks about it with any great depth. So for me, the reason why we need to be focusing on this at a leadership level is twofold. So number one is I don't believe people are taking it seriously enough, if I'm absolutely truthful. I think that it's that whole mentality of, it's not going to happen to me. And I think the further up the ladder you go, the lonelier it becomes and the less sort of around people you are to be able to have those day-to-day conversations. And then the other point is something in the stats that I read as part of the article was that 84% of employees don't believe that their leadership teams really are bought into it. So this other part of visible leadership when it comes to anything is really important, but actually being a role model and visibly leading from the front when it comes to the mental health of yourself and will impact on your team. So I think that's the reason why we're focusing on it, because it's super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Liz, anything to add to what Ross has just said?
Yeah, I think it's also our perceptions of well-being, isn't it? As I said, I work in quite a few spaces within coaching, and originally somebody might come to me saying, I want coaching on my leadership skills because that's what I want to focus on. And invariably, what we end up talking about is them not being able to be an authentic leader or the best version of their leadership because actually their well-being is suffering. They're not having time for themselves, and that's impacting their performance as well.
I'd echo that. I've had increasingly more people that I'm talking to at a senior level where you can just tell there's something not quite right. And you kind of just stop for a moment and say, like, how are you? Like, what's going on? What's on your mind? And if they feel safe enough to tell you, I definitely feel like people are not sharing what's really going on with their teams when they're talking to us. And that's definitely become more prevalent since, post COVID for sure, like understanding what this new world is, and people were looking to the leadership teams for so much, and I think it's had a real impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also you get to that sort of senior level board and you're paid to think, it's about the strategy, it's about the future focus, it's about vision. But then it's an oxymoron, isn't it? Because if you're not looking after your well-being and you haven't got that downtime, then you're not in your best thinking head to make those better decisions or even come up with new ways of working, being more innovative, more creative. So actually in the long run, everything suffers. And I agree with what Russ is saying there. You know, it's the old adage, isn't it? You ask me, oh, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. Well, that's the iceberg stuff, isn't it? We all know about can't remember the stats, there's 10% of an iceberg that sits above the water and 90% is. And I think why we need to focus on it, because if you get that response from somebody in a day-to-day conversation, coaching conversation around how are you, I'm fine, we need to be asking questions and drill down, because I'm fine is not the real answer.
And I think we're in a really uncharted waters now as well, post-COVID, and like nobody knows what the answer is. This sort of what the world looks like beyond the pandemic, and I think we've got to really sit and notice what everybody's been through. And I think it's, you know, really, really key that the leadership team take note of that, because it's all very well looking after your own teams. It's that whole what is it like? You can't pour from an empty cup, or you absolutely can't, and you've got to look after yourself.
Absolutely. And I think what you said earlier on, Ross, about it being very lonely at the top, I always remember, it's slightly off topic, but a senior leader I knew that started off as a CTO actually, and he said to me afterwards, nobody even shows me where the toilet is, because people just think you know everything at that level.
Yeah, I know, right? And it's so true that
yeah. Okay, so what are the signs to look out for in yourself?
So there's actually, I kind of want to put it in the comments if we can afterwards, and it's the 12 stages of burnout. And I think if you Google that, it'll come up. I've seen it across a number of platforms. And these are really good things to look out for in yourself. I'm not going to sit and talk through all 12 of them at all, but I thought we could kind of pick out a few and discuss them. So it kind of starts reasonably mild, and then sort of increases as you go through the 12 steps. So if you go right to the end, like the most extreme sort of step is the 12th step, if you like, and that's around having mental and physical collapse. And, you know, let's be real, that happens to people. It's happening to people more and more often. And this is the inability to be able to communicate or motivate yourself to do anything at all. And that's what we're looking at. That's what people are staring down the lens of, is that if you don't do something about this and take it seriously, that's where you could end up. If you're resilient, your resilience is only so strong. But at the beginning of these sort of 12 stages, it's the early signs really are needing to prove yourself, and working harder and harder and harder to try and achieve something that you're maybe not feeling like you're achieving, and then kind of neglecting your own needs in an attempt to try and prove this. And it's that kind of like extreme feeling. I think the big sign with this, the overarching sign, is that needing and lack of feeling in control. And I think when that starts to become more extreme, that's when it starts to sort of gather momentum. And then I suppose the other key one for me is when you're noticing, and I think I speak to a lot of people, I'm sure you do, you both do, and anyone who's a coach, this whole idea of work-life balance. And we all talk about work-life balance. And again, it's like an overused phrase, but it's really noticing, has that tipped, and has that gone in the wrong direction? You know, am I withdrawing from my social engagements? Have I withdrawn from my family? Are things, you know, if I look at the balance, has it gone the wrong way, and even the wrong way for me? So, you know, what was normal, like if people are used to working a lot, you know, are they working even more? I would say they're the key signs, and there are other ones that are, you know, we can talk about at a later date.
Okay, Liz?
You know, quite a visible level that everybody might see is, you know, if you're constantly working those long hours, if you always feel like you're catching up, your sleep's being affected, exactly as Russ was saying there. If you haven't got time for your family, for your friends, where normally that would give you joy and you know, you'd enjoy it, there's some real signs. And also, a lot of people I have say, oh, I haven't taken all my holidays this year, or I just can't, I haven't got time to do it. And for me, then that's a real red flag. And I think Russ and I were just talking now, you know, those little things, like somebody might say they've got a niggly knee or something, like, well, have you been to the doctor? Oh no, I haven't got time. You know, your health is your number one. So if you know that about yourself, but you can't prioritize the time to do it, then absolutely,
And if you have that feeling of looking, I don't mind like I say, I'm not admitting it, but I've had that feeling before where you're looking in on yourself, you're looking in on your own performance, and you feel like you're a bit of a spectator because things are just completely out of control. That's a big sign, a big sign of that. You know, you need to take a minute, and listening to your other people around you that are close. You know, your nearest and dearest will be the first to tell you. It's very easy to ignore them. Don't ignore them.
Yeah. So when you're going home and doing the snapping and the being impatient, there's some sort of thing that, you know, you just have. It's that almost like I feel a bit scratchy talking about it now. My body's sort of going a bit, but you know, literally just haven't got time for anything because your brain's just so full in the work mode that anything just starts bugging you and irritating you a bit.
Yeah. And I think always when your children tell you you're doing too much, that's a really big sign, isn't it? That you're
it's brilliant. So, and I was just chatting now. I've got my eldest is doing final year of juniors, really busy week, Leavers barbecue, different concerts, loads of things happening after school. And it's really interesting. She said to me leaving the door this morning, Mum, what would you have done if your work week had been really busy and you couldn't have made one of these events? And my heart was really like, wow, you know. And I said, well, I knew this week was coming up, so I prioritised my work well in advance. This was an important week. And if anything that I'd missed happened to fall in, I would have cancelled it. But I was really conscious that I knew that about myself. I'd forward planned, and that was my response.
Good on you for doing that, though, because people. But actually, notice that the world hasn't ended either as a result of prioritising those things. And I think that's the point, isn't it? Is what's important versus what's really important. Things like your sports days and your theatre productions are really important. If that's important to you, it might not be, but if it is.
But I thought it was really pertinent.
And it's okay to do that as well. I think people feel like they need the permission. Like it's all right. You're not a bad person, and you're not doing your job because you're choosing to go and spend an hour and watch your kids at sports day. Most employers really will be reasonably sympathetic to that.
Yeah. But I thought it was really pertinent having this conversation today, and how many people might be feeling that this week, and also not being in a position in a mental and emotional state to be able to say no, and that is important to me.
And I think if you sort of bring it back down to the point around kind of leaderships and C-suites, that's that visible leadership that I was talking about earlier, that role modeling of the behaviour. So I remember really clearly working for somebody a few years ago, and they were massive champion of flexible working, huge champion for it. Yet they couldn't work out why their teams weren't doing it. And it's because they themselves were working 100 hours a week. They themselves were not prioritising their own well-being, and it didn't feel authentic. And I think that's the key thing with this: is if you want it to live in your business, you have to sort of practice what you're preaching.
And I think that comes back to the previous question Sarah just put to us: why focus on it? Because if the senior leaders and board members aren't walking that walk and talking the talk, you're then setting that culture, as Russ was saying, that whether people want to or not, they'll copy what the leaders are doing because they feel that's what's expected. And if that's not visible, that then becomes a rub lower down because they're going to get emotional about it and demotivated and want to do it. And it's being said it's on offer, but you don't feel like you can. So then there's this sort of oxymoron. And some of the stats that I've been looking at recently as well is actually the younger workforce coming through are much better at this than, say, my generation or older. They're able to push back more. They're able to say no. They see it much more as a priority. So, there is that terminology, isn't there, about the reverse mentoring, and maybe that's something we should all get better at, and just sit down cross generations and say, what's your take on this? Like, how are you doing that? And I'm not. So interesting things.
Great. I can see there's a few questions that have come through, so I'm going to put the first one up. So this is John. So John is based in Chicago, actually. So he's saying he's asked at work if our EAP, so I'm guessing Employee Assistance Program, could send out a Sunday evening email with links to resource for anxiety relief. They push back and then it's never been done. Do you know of any examples of dealing with the Sunday scaries proactively? So I guess it's that Monday dread of going into work on Monday that he's talking about here. So,
I mean, that's a horrible feeling, isn't it? That Monday morning, like the Sunday night, Monday morning blues. Do you know of any examples of dealing with the Sunday scare? So I'd notice what they are. If it was me, I'd notice what they are, and can I do something about them? I guess it's a question around where you're at in terms of your career drivers, and it's asking some bold questions of yourself and saying, like, am I, you know, without being flippant, am I in the right job? When did this start? So was it always been like that? If you look at your career drivers and understand what they are, again, we can pop the career drivers in the chat as to what 1080 suggests and recommend. But if you align your career drivers with your current role and they're not aligned, sorry, if you compare them and they're not aligned, then that really sort of speaks volumes. It's whether you're brave enough to do something about that. But sort of, I suppose, more superficially, always notice that Monday comes and it goes. You know, and I would never advocate for living for the weekend or living for 5 o'clock. But if it really is that bad and you are sort of a bit stuck, notice the small things that you can do to make things better, and give yourself little breaks as well. Like reward yourself for achieving, like, the more. If it depends how bad it is, really. But if it is that bad, I'd be asking myself some questions as to what I would want to do fundamentally to change that from happening in the first place. I don't know whether what do you think, Liz?
Yeah, I'm not so sure about the Sunday dread and sending out support emails on the Sunday night, but I do know, isn't it France now, where is it between 7 and 7 they switch off work servers, don't they?
Yeah.
So emails can't go through, and I know some of the UK companies linked to that is instigated in the UK. So you absolutely know Sunday night there's no point checking because nothing's going to come through, and that's the same for the whole company. So I definitely think there's some process things we can think about. And even within Outlook, you know, it is starting to help us. It flags what people's working hours are, and do you want to schedule this for their work time? So although for somebody it might be okay just to clear their brains and do a few things on a Sunday night because they want to know it's done before they go in, making a note and consciously looking, if that is saying that person's, you know, next work time is 12 o'clock on Monday, then allow the technologies to schedule it so you're not overburning and just, you know, creating this hamster wheel of freneticness on Sunday night. So, you know, it's partly the person, it's partly the process.
And John, if you're listening at the moment, I would get your leadership teams to listen to this career chat because I think for an organisation to push back and dismiss something like that is, you know, it's alarming really for me.
Yeah. And also looking at it is a very recent report, isn't it, Sarah, from the Deloitte, and there's so many different stats that it's pulled out. It really is quite fascinating, of not just on a human level the impact, but also a business level and retention level if this isn't taken seriously. So it is a business problem. It's not an individual senior leadership.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The report was published on the 22nd of June this year. And I've not read it in massive detail, but I do recall reading something that actually the stats were worse this year than they were last year.
Yeah.
Which I think seemed to be a surprise.
And also the mismatch of perception that senior leaders thought employees were okay, and actually the employees were crying out, "Go, we're not." Yeah, so
84% of people. I mean, I couldn't believe that. It's a really high stat, isn't it? 84% of people think, "Oh no, it's not real in our organisation."
Yeah,
it's a shame.
Yeah, no, that's true. Okay, we move on to Alison. So Alison's saying, we all know we need to look after yourself. It seems obvious, but how do you instill this behaviour in leaders? So Russ, do you want to start again on
that? So we all know.
So I think this is kind of what we just talked about.
I'm just reading it again. Yeah. Sorry, say again.
Accountability.
Yeah.
Responsibility. You know, these are big words we all talk about in the workplace, but again, really stopping and thinking, what does that mean? If I have to really hold myself to account that my behaviour directly impacts other people in the workforce and they look up to me, I'm accountable for that. Not just so if you can't sort of rationalise it in me and my own well-being, it's how others see me, how others are looking at me, how am I in that role model. So sometimes you can almost like detach yourself, that then helps you to come back and go, but it's also important for me and now I get it. So yeah, maybe just
it's a cultural thing, isn't it, this? I mean, if you're trying to sort of instill the behaviours in leaders, it's creating a culture within the organisation, which is not an easy thing to do at all. So and ultimately we're talking about leadership teams here that maybe don't have a leader in the same way that their teams are, if that makes sense. But I would also be talking about the idea of managing upwards. So holding your manager to account, and as a leader creating that culture of being happy to be challenged. So that we talked about earlier about reverse mentoring. So genuinely being okay with your teams coming in and giving you some feedback and creating those conditions. So I'm finding that more and more and more with people. This, how do I manage upwards? How do I have conversations with my manager? Or how do I not accept that this is just, you know, this behavior, this is the status quo, this is how it's always been? How do I push back? And I think that's about having your own confidence, but the leader themselves also need to be able to create that culture to be able to allow that to happen. I think that's how you start to change behavior.
Yeah.
And it's also building that trust, you know, going off on what Russ is saying there. If you've got a good, effective team and you generally got that care factor, and your boss did turn around to you and say, oh, I just haven't got time for that doctor's appointment, or I just haven't got time to go to sports day, I'm sure 80% of your team would rally behind you and go, boss, just go. Yeah, we've got it. So exactly as well.
Yeah, totally. And also don't be too hard on yourselves as well, like, because that behavior change is hard. It's really difficult to change behavior. So I think I have this conversation with people as well, which is, oh, well, I went and tried that and it didn't work. Okay, so and it didn't work once, but just because it hasn't worked first time, like, be okay with the fact that it's not going to happen overnight, and you need to give it a go again and again and again, and gradually you'll start to shift your behavior.
Yeah. Okay, so Steve is saying, when you say feeling in control, you're a feeling to control of self rather than being in control of all work activity. So I think this, Russ, was when you were talking about the burnout stages.
I think I was it's making me think deeper than perhaps I was. I think it's an overall feeling of control. I mean, I think I was in a work context. I think it's if your to-do list is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you're spinning more and more plates, and you're noticing that you're not coping on that level, I think was kind of where I was going with this. But, you know, that whole idea, it is a deeper question, isn't it, to ask yourself, like, if is this just a work thing? Can I switch that off and be in control of this part of my life? Or, you know, that's a different question, isn't it? And I suppose, I mean, arguably, if you're reaching burnout, you're not going to be able to cope with that. So it is absolutely about that wider control of yourself.
Yeah. Liz, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's both, but also in control on an emotional level. So that sort of, if you notice that the red mist is coming over, and you did lash out, are you even aware? Are you even self-aware enough at that point to realise that is happening?
Yeah.
Or does that become acceptable as well?
Yeah, okay, that's good. And Avashi is saying, one of the signs is when others tell you you're behaving out of character and others are trying to shake you. So I think that goes back to what we've been saying as well, isn't it?
Yeah, out completely. Yeah, it's fair. And the difficulty with that as well is that it's easy to just dismiss them.
Yes,
it's easy because you're in that place where, and that's why it's important to have like your trusted people around you. And the further up the corporate ladder you go, and the bigger your role becomes, and the more lonely it becomes, as we said before, the less likely you are to have colleagues that are going to say, you know, how it is. So it's about turning to your kind of nearest and dearest at this point and listening to them.
Yeah. Okay. So Steve's come back with a couple of frameworks. So it's quite a long comment. So I'm going to put this up. Russ, you may disappear from the screen for a second. Okay. So I'm just going to put it on. Okay. So he's saying there's two important things to consider as frameworks which can support the well-being of everyone. Firstly, using smart working PAS 3000 as a standard for the approach to workplace settings and the culture which underpins that, as well as the leadership approach. Then the whole approach to Stevenson Farmer wellbeing in the workplace standards help to set up the framework for everyone to bring mental and physical wellbeing into the workplace. So have either of you come across those frameworks? Are they useful things to talk about?
I haven't heard of the Stevenson Farmer wellbeing, but you know, without knowing too much about it, I think where that comment's coming from is this idea of there's a process side that can help you with your well-being to do with productivity, efficiency, management, but on top of that, which is more important, is that human side, isn't there? The emotional connection, the trust, and trusting in that process, and also making sure that it's not just sitting there, it's actually implemented and it's being followed, and people get it and they're connected to it and they want to engage in it. So absolutely, I think there's process things, but also the human side.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, Ross?
No, I would agree with that, because the process, like you say, provides the framework, but the sort of it's the trust. I mean, I'm just repeating what you're saying, Liz. To be honest, I just
Yeah, it's good.
The human to human connection is what will drive that forward for sure. I think the thing is with this as well is that I imagine, based on the people that I've spoken to in the last sort of 12 months, that there will be leaders out there kind of questioning themselves for the first time and thinking, well, what has just happened? What's going on because of what we've all been through over the last couple of years. And I think it's just, hopefully, if we reach out to a few people with, through this medium, and they get a bit of comfort that actually, oh, okay, that's why I'm probably that's why it feels weird and different. That's a job well done for me with this.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So how can you help yourself? So Ross, start with that one.
So I think, without wishing to repeat myself, really, I think the key thing is taking a minute and taking a breath to notice what's going on, and actually just sort of stopping and smelling the roses a little bit, and then listening to other people. I think that's the one thing, like listening and noticing what other people are actually saying and not dismissing it would be the first thing that I would say that will go to helping yourself, and trying to prioritize, almost taking a bit of a stock take of your day-to-day sort of activities, and notice whether there is any downtime there at all, and have you knocked out all of what you would deem the nice to do stuff, and trying to prioritize that slightly more on the basis that it's okay for me to take 5 minutes here because that's to do with that's me taking a well-being break, and that's as important as anything else.
Yeah. And Liz?
Yeah, for me it is, it's time management, which is energy management, which is life management. And as Russ was saying there, it's just looking at the whole picture and saying, if this idea of, I worked with Chris Griffiths for a long time and Tony Buzan, and they used to practice this and sort of put in their diary meeting with self for an hour, so dedicated time where they had that time just to think, not in the freneticness, not in the busyness, but it was that thinking time, which actually, ironically, at senior leader level, you are paid to do. So I think, and also thinking about, yes, if you're lucky to work in a corporate and they give you these amazing well-being days, maybe, once a quarter, and you've got team building and yoga retreats and all that, that is fantastic. It is great that that's available and part of the process. But if you're going to come away from that and maybe feel more stressed because you've had a day out from the office, or generally don't feel any better from it, I think there's a bigger organisational question to ask there as to, is this the token? Is this the sticking plaster? Because what you need is that longer, more sustainable habits that help you overall. Meeting with self. It's okay to make an appointment with a doctor. How am I connecting with my team for them also to support me, as well as Russ is saying, managing it and having these conversations. So for me, looking at how you can, what habits are helpful for you, that can be longer term, not just short fixes here and there, that help you sometimes maybe push back and say no to things, because you are prioritizing yourself, and that's okay.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So just one question, a quick one, if we've got time. So what might a mental health check-in look like? So Liz, any ideas on that?
I think it's an honest conversation. If you're fortunate enough to be able to engage with an actual coach who can really question you with no biases, not really knowing you, really like support and challenge you at the same time, to support you to work out what's best for you. Because what would work for me is not going to be the same for you, Sarah. It's not going to be the same for us. You've got to find out what your drivers are. But in absence of that, I think we all just got to get better at having those honest conversations. And the basic ones of, if a response is, I'm fine, question that and go, really? Let's sit down and have a coffee and let me just ask you a little bit more and drill down a little bit more. And you'd be surprised, where that conversation goes.
And I would find somebody to do that with, actually. So even if like as Liz says, you've got the opportunity to recruit a coach to be able to do that. But if you haven't got that opportunity, then who is it? Who's the person that you can have that with? Because even if that's something that is not available to you through your employer, there's nothing to stop you reaching out for somebody privately to have these conversations with, without a doubt.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And it's not therapy. So it's important to mention here that you would not be engaging in therapy with a business coach. You'd be engaging with a mental health check-in, which is more about looking at having an exploratory conversation about your priorities and you know what's on your mind. If you are at a stage where you think, oh, I need more than that, then obviously we would have to, recommend some sort of therapy.
Yeah, really good point.
Great, thank you. So we are on to our top tip to leave with. So Russ, what is your top tip?
Okay, so my top tip is to, when you get off this call, go and find or commit between now and like tomorrow to go and find somebody that you trust and ask them the question, what should I do differently? Go and ask that question and listen to the answer. And if it's something really radical, do not dismiss it. Just take a minute to really think about what the answer is.
Okay, that's good.
My top tip.
Okay, and Liz?
A bit like Russ, it's a question rather than a necessary tip. But 2 things. If you don't feel like you've got time to take off for you, 2 places you can look at. One is your processes at work, and look at that and challenge your thinking around, is it the process that's stopping me? And what would I need to change and improve in terms of databases, systems, automation, whatever it might be to help you from a process level. And if that's still not letting you take time off, then challenge your own thinking and your own mindset around, what is it to do with me that I feel I can't take the time off? And then that leads nicely into what Russ has just suggested. So the 2 tips go together really.
Perfect, thank you. We've just got one final comment from Michelle, who's saying at 5:30 every day she's got a daily recurring appointment called Reflection Plan to help her organise herself, but sometimes she's too busy to attend. So
awesome, love it.
Yeah.
So thank you, Michelle. So thank you very much for everyone joining. Thank you very much, Liz and Russ, for all of your tips and insight there. And as I said, we will go back and answer any questions that come through later for people that are watching on the replay. And our next session, which will most likely be in September, will be focusing on creating a CV specifically for non-exec director or charity trustee positions. So we will confirm dates and speakers. So thanks again and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you very much, all.
Thanks. Bye.